Welcome to Resident Chalk Talks. So today we're going to talk about the immune system per the most upvoted at the time, upvoted comment and request. So the goal of this talk is just brief overview to kind of give you like a framework on to which you can then pile on, ridiculous amount of information that we need to memorize as med students and residents. And so, I'm going to be giving you a diagram, hopefully something easy to remember that you could draw out, and then you can start putting facts and figures and things like that that you need to know onto the diagram. So first thing, our immune system, the primary goal, right, it's a coordinated decision-making network in our body that will detect danger, decide whether it needs to escalate, and then respond appropriately, and then remember those important threats. And so we're going to start off with a diagram with the immune system. And forgive me while I talk. I'm just kind of drawing this out as we go. So we have the immune system. Main goals, right, are to detect, to decide. After we detect, after we decide, we respond. And after we respond, we remember. So it's not just about killing germs or viruses, right? It's a constant surveillance. It's not episodic. It's constantly going on. It protects against external pathogens and internal pathogens, self versus non-self, and then decides what to do with that information, okay? And so we have we have outside versus inside, right? We have physical barriers and we have an internal defense. So starting off with our physical barriers, physical barrier, we have skin and mucosa, right? And our skin and mucosa are the primary initial defense. So location matters more than people know. The same cells behave differently in tissue versus lymph node, and this is where a lot of confusion can, start. So for our first one, we have our external defense. We have our skin and mucosa, physical separation from the environment, right? We have bacteria on the outside, viruses on the outside, fungi and parasites, prions, all on the outside of our body. Our skin and mucosa provide some sort of physical barrier. There are chemical defenses within our skin and mucosa, like enzymes. We have acids, right, in our stomach. And we have mucus trapping, right? We have mucus trapping both in our, like our sinuses and our lungs. And this is where a lot of the beginning of the immune system takes place. And it's an invisible thing. We don't know. You can inhale a COVID virus or a bacteria, or you could swallow a bacteria, and we are not infected until those pathogens actually enter our cells and begin to cause symptoms. And not necessarily symptoms, but enter our cells. So that's within our body, but it's being taken care of by this external defense. And with this, when this is working, we don't have inflammation. Okay. Then we have an internal defense. And what I think I'll do at the end of this is draw this out into something like a PDF that I can actually link in the video so you guys can have it. So when the threat gets past our barriers, we go over to internal defense. This is where it gets all complicated, right? With our T cells and B cells and our... So now moving into internal defense, when things get past those barriers, our skin and mucosa, the things that are supposed to detect and block, then we have to get into how our body decides to respond, because at this point now we're infected, right? So now we're talking about escalation. Time becomes critical, and it's about speed versus precision. And I'll explain a little bit more into that in a second. So we get past the barriers, we get to our internal defense, and this splits up into adaptive and innate. Innate is what we're born with, right? It's what's given to us. And adaptive is what's earned, essentially. Once you get infected and you fight it off, you've earned that response. That's a way to think about it. But it's how our body learns and decides to respond and remember what we've done to fight the infection. So now we've talked about adaptive innate as an idea. Adaptive is delayed and specific. This is what we've earned. This is what we've learned through these infections. And innate is fast and generic. I'm just going to cut it off there. So fast and generic, meaning it's what our body does automatically when we have an infection or a foreign body in order to address that. You could think of it like driving a car and you need to slam on the brakes. You see something in front of you, you know it's a threat, you have to slam on the brakes and swerve. That is your innate response. And depending on how much you've learned driving, how long you've been driving, you will have an adaptive response as well. So those of us who've driven in the snow, for example, know that you turn into a skid or like a slide rather than turn away from it. You don't accelerate in that slide. You don't just slam on the brakes, but you press on the brakes slowly, right? That's an adaptive response. We've learned how to do that over time. So for our innate immunity, but we have our innate immune system. This is our fast and generic, right? It's pattern-based. It's always on. Always on. It's always surveilling. It's the same response. And so it buys time. It's the same response every time. It buys time for our innate immunity. It buys time for our adaptive immunity. The main question asked by our innate immunity is this a threat? And this is one thing to know. We talked about there's no inflammation over here. We have start of inflammation here. So start of inflammation lives here. And next we have our innate cell roles. Our adaptive cell roles. Which I'll go into in a second, because there's some cells we need to talk about with our innate cells. And so within our innate cells, we have the cells here. We have our phagocytes. We have our dendritic cells. And we have our NK cells, natural killer cells. Okay? And so not all innate cells are killers. Some exist simply to pass along information. And the function matters more than the names, but right now we'll go over each one individually. So I'm going to just drop down here for a moment. So first we'll talk about our phagocytes, or phagocytes, however people like to say it. So these little cells, they respond immediately. Because remember, this is an innate cell. Our innate response is therefore an automatic response that we do every time with every foreign antigen. It responds immediately because it's buying time. So our phagocytes are within our innate cells. It's going to be fast and generic. Their main job is to respond immediately. It is to detect and respond, right? So like we said, detect and respond. And what it will do is primarily attack, eat, kill, however you want to say it, whatever's been identified as our foreign body, foreign antigen, the threat to our body, essentially. And so that's where we're at with the phagocyte. And so, just a little memory. It's kind of like, I just like to view it as like Pac-Man, right? We have our bacteria. That's not even Pac-Man, right? That's just a blob. but we have a bacteria, and our phagocyte's going to go ahead and eat the bacteria. And so they will arrive first. Generally, like our phagocytes, so these like our neutrophils will arrive first. They're like our first responders. And then after that, our macrophages, they're going to arrive and they're going to persist longer. Right? So they're second responders essentially. And they're around longer. The way I like to think of these guys, like this is like EMS. This kind of gets you to the hospital or whatever, gets you to where you need to be. And then this is like our physicians. Just in terms of timeline, right? EMS is quick responding. They have the things that they do, very similar things every time. And then you get to your physicians, and you get your tailored, or not necessarily tailored, but long-term care. Long-term addressing the problem. And so, like we said, detect and respond. We get the cleaning up of debris, sets the stage for signaling essentially as well. Next thing to talk about is our dendritic cells. So our dendritic cells, they carry the threat information. Dendritic cells. So they carry the threat information to the lymph nodes. So they carry threat info to lymph nodes. Okay? So these guys are they function in a way almost like messengers. So they carry to the lymph nodes, and this drives escalation decisions, right? Our lymph nodes are kind of the center of how our body decides how it's going to respond. And so we have our dendritic cell, and then we have our little lymph nodes throughout our body. I know they don't look like this. Lymph nodes. And our dendritic cells will take information to our lymph nodes. And so these guys, there are professional antigen presenters, right? So we can kind of think about, they have their little receptors with some sort of foreign antigen that's sitting in the receptor. And they're going to bring that information to our lymph nodes where B cells live and other cells, and then that helps our body decide what's going to happen next. They transport information, right? Not just pathogens. So when we've eaten our little bacteria here, we've eaten the little bacteria, and that bacteria then gets digested, and little pieces of information in the cell or the outside of the cell, right, of the bacterial cell that's foreign to our body, gets digested. And we talked about APCs. We haven't talked about that yet, but we're kind of touching on it now. But our APCs, antigen-presenting cells, then present that information. So it's not necessarily presenting, this isn't necessarily a bacteria, but it's like an antigen. Some sort of protein, some sort of carbohydrate, or something that's foreign that gets presented to the next level of cells that's going to start making decisions. And so the key thing here to remember is this is our bridge between our innate and adaptive immunity. Okay, and I'm just going to go back up here and draw a little line, the little bridge between our innate and adaptive immunity is going to be our dendritic cells. Our dendritic cells. One thing, just, this is my first time doing this. If there's anything, feedback people have for me, please let me know. I want to make this clear. I spend way too much time as a med student trying to figure these things out, trying to find resources that worked for me. A lot of resources that I found didn't have feedback mechanisms, so I just had to go find another one. But I want to be adaptive to the needs of the people who are watching these videos and who I'm trying to essentially teach. So please, if there's anything that you like, don't like, feel like would make it better, let me know, and I'll try to build that into the next videos that I make. Okay, so those are the dendritic cells. Next we have NK cells. This is our early kill cells, right? NK cells. These are the big bad boys that are going to go and start eliminating infected or abnormal host cells. So eliminate infected / abnormal host cells. Host cells. And so this is also before adaptive immunity. So these guys are just going to go ahead, they're going to kill host cells that are infected, they're presenting antigens that they shouldn't be presenting proteins that they shouldn't be presenting. So this, NK cells are really good for viral infections. Generally, viral infections are a lot faster than our bacterial infections. You can kind of think to the fact that, someone presents to clinic, they have upper respiratory infection symptoms, they have, like they've got snot running out of their nose, it's clear snot, they've had it for less than a week, we're generally going to call that, viral infection. Then you can have a superimposed bacterial infection over it, or you could have a bacterial infection, we still haven't treated it initially because we're giving it time to see if it's actually viral or bacterial. They're good for viral infection, they're good for tumor surveillance. Okay, good. You don't need any prior exposure, so we don't need prior exposure. And this is the same thing with the two other cells I talked about, the dendritic cells and the phagocytes. And then it's an early containment, essentially, these the NK cells. So going back just briefly, we have the phagocytes, they detect and respond. Dendritic cells, they help with the decision, right, because they're bringing things to the lymph nodes. And then we have our NK cells, which are responding as well. So phagocytes, NK cells both respond by killing or consuming the target that it needs to. Now moving on to our lymph nodes. So lymph nodes, when we come back up here, we have our adaptive and innate on this right side here. Something I didn't mention, or that we're going to add under here, is lymph nodes. So lymph nodes are important for our adaptive immunity. And so lymph nodes receive this information because we have over here, we have our tissue, some tissue, whatever we're going to draw. And in this tissue, we may have infected cells. And then we have our phagocytes that are going to come in. We have our dendritic cells that are going to come in, right? And we have our natural killer cells. And this is all of our innate immunity. Then we have somewhere out in our, along our lymph, we know how to check these in the OSCEs, unfortunately, that we all still have to do. We get information from our tissue to the lymph nodes. So lymph nodes receive that information from the tissue. It's like an information convergence point, right? It's kind of like a hub for data that our body's collecting. So you can kind of think of it, it's almost like it's like an immunological cloud, right? Immunologic cloud database. And in here we have cell-to-cell communication, cell-to-cell comms. This is where activation and expansion occurs, which I can go over in a later video. Activation and expansion. When we get this information, like what we're talking about here, we get this information, this can lead to lymph node swelling. As a result of our activation and expansion. So it's not just a filter, it's a command center. So now some more information about our adaptive immune system. It provides targeted response and long-term memory. Okay? This is what we've earned. We've earned this information from getting infected, from getting sick. Adaptive immune system. So, like I said, targeted response and long-term memory. Okay? So, adaptive immune system. We have things to remember when you think about adaptive immune system. Hopefully words that come to mind are specific, antigen, driven, memory, These are the words that kind of come to mind when I think about adaptive immune system to help me remember what it does. Things to remember in terms of the characteristics: it is slow to start, which explains the difference between IgM and IgG, although IgM is also adaptive. But slow to start, it's precise, it produces strong secondary responses, and then this whole idea, adaptive immune system, this is kind of what this is what we base our vaccine, the whole basis of vaccines are on the basis of our adaptive immune system and how it works. So, adaptive immunity is carried out by antigen-specific lymphocytes. Okay, antigen-specific lymphocytes. We have B cells and T cells. Okay, they both require activation. Okay, and I'm not going to get into the whole, selection of these cell lines, where they develop, how they develop, all the specific mechanisms and feedback. That's, really deep. Like I said, my goal is to give you a framework of how this works, and hopefully an idea of how to build on this information. So we get clonal expansion. It's highly regulated. It's location dependent. So moving on first to the B cells. B cells produce antibodies. They make antibodies, right? Antibodies are what are going to help with the complement activation. So they make antibodies. And then they contribute to our immune memory through the antibodies. Contribute to immune memory. These, there's plasma cells. They provide us antibody specificity. They can neutralize pathogens with our antibodies. When antibodies, we have a pathogen, and we have our nice little antibodies here that they can come in, bind to some receptor, or not necessarily receptor, well, possibly receptor or antigen on the bacteria or the virus. This could just be labeled pathogen, and then they can neutralize it, right? So it can't enter our cell. And then they also help with opsonization, right? Opsonization for phagocytes. And then, one thing to remember as we, think about this is that these cells persist. The memory cells persist. Okay? T cells. These ones coordinate the immune response and eliminate infected cells. Okay? So they coordinate response and eliminate infected cells. We split these into two. We have our cytotoxic and our helper. Well, we'll start with helper here on the left. Helper T cells. We have cytotoxic on the right. And so these are cell-mediated immunity, right? Over here on this side, on our B cells, this is humoral immunity. This is what flows around in our plasma, and I can do a whole, another talk about plasma and humoral immunity. And here on this side, this is cell-mediated. Cell-mediated versus humoral immunity. Both of them are adaptive immunity. And we have some cell-mediated immunity, right, with our phagocytes, our dendritic cells, our NK cells. And so our helper and cytotoxic cells, they have different roles within the same family. So helpers T cells, they help to direct and amplify immune response. So direct and amplify immune response. And our killer T cells help to destroy infected host cells. So destroy in the name. So the way that the helper T cells work is they work through cytokine signaling. And I can do another talk about cytokines as well, but again, that's in the weeds. I don't want in the weeds right now. I want framework to build on. So cytokine mediated. They can also activate B cells. Okay. They activate macrophages. And then one thing to know is that if we don't have these, without them, we are weak. You know, we're weak without many of these, but we really miss a central part of our immune system if we're losing our helper T cells. Like I said, cytotoxic, their main job is to destroy, really good for viral infection. Okay? And that's the thing to remember, going back to the B cells, these are going to be good for specifically fungi and bacteria. We have B cells for all types of infection that we have, but when I try to break down and just develop schemas, this could be viral cancers. These are just how I throw them in, with knowing the caveat that there are exceptions to the rule. And so, with destruction of the pathogens and destruction of the infected cells, it prevents replication. Very important. Okay, and then essentially, the host cell of the pathogen sacrifices itself for our system survival. So there's a lot of information I just gave, but I just want to start to tie it together, okay? So the immune response follows a very predictable flow from detection to decision to response to memory, okay? We start off with barriers. Now we're talking about our innate immunity, barriers, and our mucosa, barriers, mucosa, tissues, and then we move to, once it gets past that, we move to an innate immunity. Right, in our innate immunity, what is that? That's fast and generic. We have the 3 cells that we like to talk about, or that we just talked about. We have our NK cells, which are destroy. We have our dendritic cells, which help with our passing along information, right? It helps us decide. We have our phagocytes, which both help us detect and destroy, or respond, is what I've been saying. After this, we move to the lymphatics. How do we move to the lymphatics? Through the bridge made by dendritic cells. We talked about the lymph nodes being kind of our central command, our decision makers for our body, whether we're going to escalate or not escalate. Okay? Once that information gets passed along, this plays a role into developing our adaptive immunity. And after adaptive immunity, we have our memory that we rely on later on. Nothing's random, right? This coordinates across our body. So immunology makes more sense when you separate the location, the timing, the decision level. Okay? If we're going to separate location here, this is in our barriers, our mucosa tissue, location here, within our lymph node, location here. We have also in lymph nodes and our blood, right? If we separate timing, we have fast, and we have slow, or slower. Okay? And so I would encourage you to think about it this way. Watch this back if you did. Again, please give me feedback. I'm more than happy to address any major, issues. If my handwriting's messy, if this was kind of disorganized for you, please let me know. I want to make this comfortable and understanding and easy to follow. I'd be more than happy to make more videos. Please, if you enjoyed this, follow, like and follow it. Respond to my posts on Reddit when I'm going to reach out and ask what other information we know. And yeah, hit me up, message me if you need. You can also reach me at Axiom didactics@gmail.com. If you have questions, comments, concerns, please let me know. Like and follow if you found this interesting, or if you just trust that I will adapt to what you guys need. All right.